안녕하십니까.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. 2022 Korea Global Forum for Peace, Session 2-3 will start now. And this session is hosted by the Institute for Far Eastern Studies, IFES. We'll be talking about the changes and prospects for North Korea's foreign policy and strategy towards South Korea in the Kim Jong-un era. My name is Ki-won-se. I am director of the IFES of Kyungnam University. We have 3 presenters, and also we will have a general discussion with 3 discussants. Let me now give you our speakers and discussants. We have the experts on the North Korean military, and we have Mr. Kim Dong-yup, professor of University of North Korean Studies. He will be our first speaker. He will be followed by Mr. Hisashi, and he's visiting research fellow in the Institute of Far Eastern Studies. He's from Japan, and he's going to also give us the implications about the inter-Korean relations. The third speaker will be Mr. Im Il-chul, to be talking about the possibility exploring of the inter-Korean relationship improvement. He's our associate professor at IFES of Kyungnam University. That will be the end of the presentations, and then we will have the discussions with our discussants. And we have Professor Kim's discussant. He is Peter Ward. He is a visiting fellow of IFES of Kyungnam University. And for the Hirashi's presentation on the changes of the environment after the summit, it will be discussed by Mr. Jo Jin-gu, our assistant professor. And then the last speech will be discussed by Mr. Kim Young-kyung, emeritus professor of National Institute for Unification Education. As you know, for the inter-Korean relations, we have various sessions, and then we have our time limited. So I have to be a timekeeper for all of you. So I really appreciate your cooperation for being punctual. So each speaker will be given 15 minutes, and discussant will have 5 minutes. And we all have our slides already distributed, so you can pinpoint what is really important and essential. And also, if you are discussing very important issues for all of us to understand and agree and share, that will be very much helpful for our timekeeping. And then we will also entertain the questions from the audience as well. And also, anybody who is with us online can have their chances of asking their questions within our time constraint. So we will start now without further ado. So we would like to now introduce Kim Dong-yup for the first presentation about the evaluation and the prospect of the inter-Korean relations. He must have his slides. And we have a lot of ideas and information to show you through the slides, but I really hope that you can keep to the important main points. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Let's introduce. I am Kim Dong-yup, assistant professor of the University of North Korean Studies. The title of my presentation is North Korea's External Strategies and Current and Future Military Situations on the Korean Peninsula. So regarding the evaluation and also prospects for the military situations in North Korea, we have to understand what North Korea is scared most, whether it's the external or internal factors, and also how they perceive the changes that are currently brewing on the Korean Peninsula. I personally believe that North Korea's security environment, with the resumption of the joint military exercise between Korea and the U.S., as well as the military threat by the U.S., I believe that the North Korea is facing some threats. However, what really determines North Korea's external strategies and military strategies are changes in the internal environment rather than the external environment. So a lot of changes, a lot of people believe that the current changes are driven by the Kim Jong-un era, but I don't think so. Because already back in 2008, before the death of the Kim Jong-il, he was seriously sick in 2008, and he actually implemented several changes, and that changes still persist even today. And after the death of the Kim Jong-il, the Kim Jong-un took power, and the changes have continuously been made to create what it is today. In other words, the current changes that we see in North Korea actually happened from the 2008 when Kim Jong-il was still alive. And in fact, there have been very significant internal changes, especially during the shift from the Kim Jong-il era to Kim Jong-un era. So one of the most visible change that we see today, yes, there are rising tension between the U.S. and North Korea. But what's more significant is what happens in North Korea. And recently, during the 8th convention of the Workers' Party, the Kim Jong-un announced a very different approaches. But during the Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il era, their policy is people-first policies. That's why they have allowed the spreading of the cell phones and also the creation of the so-called 장마당 or private market. So this indicates that there are some growing citizenship in North Korea, and the control and suppression no longer works in North Korea. So in the past, North Korea pursued so-called military-first policies, but without changing that, they cannot fulfill the people-first policies. So yes, there are a lot of changes that may come from the changes in the external threat, but I believe that the more changes have been brought by due to the changes in internal conditions. And in this situation, yes, external security environment is also important, and one of the key factors is that the perceptions of North Korean people have been broadened because of the introduction of external influences. And also, externally speaking, the strategic competition has escalated between the US and China. And already back in 2008, there have been the US-China strategic dialogue, which started to take place since 2009. And this, at the time, I think that North Korea already predicted that this tension between China and the US will be protracted. And so somehow I think that they have created the framework to respond to that. And nowadays we use the term New Cold War era. So in this era of New Cold War, I think that North Korea has made a serious consideration that what kind of choices will South Korea make. So the current administration and the previous administration, what North Korea watch out for them is that in this heightened tension between the US and China, which side Korea will take side between China and the US. So not just the current administration, the South Korean government, including the Moon Jae-in administration, they have already shown some shift to US first diplomatic approaches. And that signal has become very visible since the Hanoi summit. And so since then, the Kim Jong-un's military policies and diplomatic policies have been changed as well. And they started to talk about so-called head-on confrontation. But I believe that this change is not new. Rather, that path has already been taken by North Korea in 2008 during the Kim Jong-il era, but then they somehow deviated slightly from that path. And then after the Hanoi summit, they returned back to their original path that was set already back in 2008. And therefore, the changes that we see today is not something new. Rather, this is just sort of the gradual change that started to take place since Kim Jong-il era. Some people think that the current changes occur after the inauguration of the President Yoon Suk-yeol. And so they say that this change is pretty temporary and short-term, but I doubt that. So I think that this kind of change is something that started from a long time ago, like from 2008, in the midst of the growing tension between the US and China, as well as because of the changes within North Korea among the citizens. And also they do have the threat of terrorism, as well as the regime instability, which will be stirred up by the North Korean public. And therefore, in order to respond to these challenges, they have made changes in internal and external policies. And that has led to what North Korea is today. And here you can see the North Korea's national strategies as well as the defense development plans. And you can see that currently North Korea focuses on economic development to build a self-reliant economy. And also, as for the diplomacy, they implement the so-called offensive diplomacy. And for military, they try to build the self-reliant defense system. So these three work together to achieve its goal of establishing the socialist prosperous nation through the development of the Joseon Revolution. So we have the external strategies and the military strategies, but they are not the goals. Rather, for North Korea, they are more about the means to achieve their ultimate goal of establishing socialist, prosperous nation. So currently, they are focusing all their efforts on academic development, but at the same time, they try to develop social culture and also the ethics for offensive diplomacy and self-reliant defense system. And therefore, I will say that North Korea's current strategies are more about means to address the internal issues and also to achieve its ultimate goal of making North Korea a prosperous socialist country. So as for the offensive diplomacy, if you look at as the U.S.-China relations get complicated and tension is growing between the two countries, some say that we are now living in an era of new Cold War. Some say that we are in an era of the bifurcated confrontation. I wouldn't say whether it's the bipolar or zero-polar system, but I think that the current situation is more like the zero-polar, let's say, system. But anyway, the U.S.-China confrontation has been heightened and aggravated, and therefore North Korea's diplomacy policies. In fact, for them, the structure is pretty similar with the past. In the past, we had the Cold War between the U.S. and the USSR, and North Korea sided with Russia. So after the debacle of the socialist nations, including USSR, the US became the sole hegemony in the global order. But now, again, we have the bifurcation system, bifurcated order emerging between the US and China. So somehow we see the renaissance of the Cold War era. So we do have the countries on two fronts, like-minded countries. So the U.S. has the alliance with the NATO, European countries, and they create a solidarity that go against China and Russia. So for North Korea's perspective, I think that they can actually take the advantage of the current tension between the US and China. And so for them, the current structure or the current bifurcated order is not that negative for North Korea. So in this situation, North Korea is not likely to call for dialogue with the US or try to improve relations with South Korea. Rather, they will just put them on the back burner, and in order to cater to their national interest, they will stick more to the Russia or China, where they share their national interest. So they will continue to seek solidarity and strengthen relationship with China and Russia. And even for militarily speaking, you can see that along with the offensive diplomacy, North Korea pursues hardline military policies, and they believe that the nuclear deterrence is not enough because in terms of the completion and technology, it's still rudimentary, and also it doesn't really have a strong deterrence that can target the U.S. mainland, and therefore they will continue to beef up the traditional and conventional military forces as well. So North Korea has pursued the parallel development of economy and military, and there are some disputes whether North Korea continues with this policy or not. And I don't think that North Korea is currently pursuing this parallel development of economy and military. And so in the past, they focused only on military development, and recently their focus is more on economic development. So they are trying to achieve the dual purposes of economic development and military development. And I wouldn't think that the North Korea is returning back to its previous policy to have the economic development. They are trying to relieve the public's concerns on the insecurity issues. And also they are trying to cut off all the leakages in terms of security. So currently they are focusing on so-called low-hanging fruits, things that can be developed at affordable, low cost, things that can be developed easily. For example, like the low-range missiles, ballistic missiles, the cruise missiles, as well as the hypersonic missiles. So they are developing these low-cost weapons and defense systems. So through the selective strengthening, either the nuclear weapon, nuclear deterrence, or the conventional deterrence, I think North Korea is now implementing its military strategies. So what North Korea eventually aims to do is that so currently, North Korea pursues the 5-year economic development plan, and in order to facilitate that, they pursue military strategies. After the Biden administration in the U.S. and also after the South Korea-U.S. summit in May 20th, there have been some exchanges of communications among the U.S., China, Russia, and North Korea. So with regards to the joint military exercise, Russia expressed its opinion, China expressed its opinion, and also with the Russian-Ukraine war, both China and North Korea expressed their support. So by doing so, the Russia, China, and also North Korea, they cooperate to have a very offensive diplomacy. And therefore, even if North Korea conducts the missile test and nuclear tests even in the future, I think that it is very difficult to implement and strengthen the UN sanctions against North Korea.
Well, thank you very much for keeping the time. I know that you have prepared a lot and you were able to succinctly speak what's important out of your presentations. So internal matters are more important than the external ones. And also, the internal and external strategies of North Korea have already started from 2008 and have been continued. they had been just away from their original trend a little bit before the U.S.-North Korea summit. They came back on track, and it is not something new just starting right now. It has a very long and historical root, is that. And also, it has been also a very good presentation. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Hirai Hisashi for the evaluations and prospect of the foreign strategies of the Kim Jong-un regime. Thank you very much. Although my Korean is not so perfect, I'd like to just use my Korean language for my presentation. So I believe that the failure of U.S.-North Korea Hanoi summit would be the worst case scenario for Kim Jong-un, and was the biggest failure in his own life as well. But he was able to get back on the ground to move on with his life, actually. So he was able to reset the regime, and that's what he really wanted to do throughout the whole year of 2018 and 19. And also, at the end of the year of 2019, he was able to have the plenary meeting of the Workers' Party of Korea. And then at that time, he was declaring the hands-on confrontation. So he had his own slogan. And also, as mentioned by the previous speaker, he was actually going back on track, but it used to be the North Korean guidelines, and then he wanted to be self-sufficient in the policies at the same time. So such a hands-on confrontation should have sought success with the help of the environment of international community, and also internally they have to solidify the mindset of the people with the support of the general public. So it was a combination of every factor. So I can give you 5 points in this topic. The first one is the changes of the nuclear policy, and also that's the relationship with the U.S. And the third one is the inter-Korean relationship, and also the next one is the new bloc with Russia included. And also I can talk about the overall foreign relations from the global perspective. So the New Year's speech in 2019, looking back, was a very epoch-making one. He was making a very unexpected announcement, and he said that the denuclearization was a resolution of himself, according to his speech prior to that. And then we are now seeing the opposite direction. But in his policy of the nuclearization and denuclearization, now we are seeing the differences before and after that announcement. Prior to that, deterrence was his most important keyword, but at the 8th plenary meeting, he said that the tactical nuclear power force was starting. So the tactical nuclear force was working not only as a deterrence, but also as a triggering effect of using the nuclear arms. So from the tactical to the strategic use of the nuclear force was actually starting from his New Year's speech at that time. When I was in the North Korea, people there told me that I shouldn't have to worry because the nuclear facilities are only for the other countries than Japan or South Korea. But that kind of stance must have changed a bit. And also very recently, we are seeing also some change of tone because we hear the statements from both Kim Jong-un and Kim Il-sung, because the nuclear must have another function to be added. That's the statement that they made, and also with that, we are seeing some changes of their stance as well. So maybe they say that it might be likely to use the tactical nuclear force and capabilities if needed or if possible. And also Chosun Shinbo, as a newspaper, said that there was a new stance in the editorial. And now next, I'll be talking about the North Korea and U.S. relationship. The North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, actually said that they could wait until the end of the year when he was making a speech at that time. But what was the result? The result was that there was no response from the U.S. Trump didn't say anything afterwards in response. Then the power was changed in the United States. So the Biden administration was started without having tangible changes that Kim Jong-un wanted to see. Therefore, the lines of the diplomatic relations to the U.S. from North Korea cannot be thought of being possible to be changed. Therefore, I think that even if there are some trials of making conversations or having the gesture of the dialogues, they will be neglected by the North Korea now. So also Kim Jong mentioned that they should have the power to power, goodwill to goodwill. However, they also changed the slogan to power and head-on breakthrough or heads-on contest. So we see that there is a likelihood for them to be in a very serious situation. But I personally do not believe that there will be a physical confrontation between the two. So because we know that there is a very severe relationship between the U.S. and China. So U.S. must be very busy dealing with China alone. So I don't think that there is a likelihood for them to have the actual conflict. Next issue is about the North-South relationship. So after the Hanoi summit failure, Kim Jong-un changed his position toward South Korea as well. Prior to that, inter-Korean relationship was very good, but suddenly it got soured. And why is that? Now I wonder what the causes and reasons must be. So there can be many candidates. One is that South Korea has continued joint military exercises. Maybe that's one of the reasons. And second reason to disappoint Kim Jong-un might be the efforts of having the acquisition of the state-of-the-art military assets and the acquisition of the other arms imported from other countries. That could be another reason. And the third reason that might be the dismantlement of the nuclear facilities and lifting of sanctions. So the countries without having nuclear powers, what would they really have to have other than that? So in the South Korean, there must be also have differing ideas. So if you go back to the past, in Hanoi summit, they also had a discussion of dismantling Yangbyon and in return for the economic reward. That idea was not proven yet. And maybe in the dialogues with the President Moon at that time, Kim Jong-un might have not felt that there is an assurance. So that kind of guarantee was not enough to assure him that he can dismantle and do away with the nuclear facilities. So these must be the reasons why Kim Jong-un was so much frustrated and abruptly with this South Korea. Basically, in 2020, there was also a blow-up of the joint liaison office between North and South Korea. What they say while doing so was that enemies are enemies after all. So that's what the Unified Front Department said. So 2020 was the year when the relationship with the South should be the enemy-to-enemy relationship, as I think. We can sense those tones from the remarks and statements by Kim Yo-jong as well. So that kind of stance has been maintained until today. So we can also talk about the relationship with the government. Whenever there is a new government in power, they normally wait until they can feel for what the nature of the governments are really. But while we are listening to the statements by Kim Yo-jong and Kim Jong-un, even after Yoon administration came in and in the South, they abruptly said that they will not talk with this administration at all. So of course we understand that they have their already strong stance, but they may have decided that they are going to continue such a stance even after a power change in the South. So I personally believe that it will be very difficult for us to persuade North Korea, even with the bold proposal and initiative by this new administration, because Kim Yo-jong said that this audacious initiative proposed by Yoon administration is a replica of the President Lee Myung-bak's earlier proposal of the 3,000 opening and the denuclearization or DOT. So I believe that there should be a new approach to deal with North Korea, not having to resort to the same previous repetition of the already known proposals and programs. I don't have time to elaborate on that, but I can just brief. In the Rodong Shinmun, a newspaper, on April 2022, there was an editorial. The editorial said that many countries are trying to become the new power. So while they are trying to become a big power, even if there are a lot of different lines among these powers, there is a pressure campaign on these new emerging countries. I believe that the editorial was gearing toward China, because China might have the collaboration and coordination with the U.S. in order to curb down the intention of the nuclear programs by the North. So maybe the North has sensed that initiative. And after that editorial, also I see some changes in their tones as well. They said they're going to have the better collaboration, so that kind of very strong message has got now. I also personally believe that the nuclear programs are something that should be taken care of, and probably thinking of the relationship with China, probably this nuclear programs will not be dealt with because of the relationship with President Xi, especially. In 2006, the UFD became a national level organization. And also, if you look at the websites, they have the website called 우리 민족끼리, and we never know who's leading that website or organization. And even we do not know whether that kind of website or the organizations really exist. 우리 민족끼리. In the 8th plenary meeting, the North Korea also did not create the secretary to deal with the South Korea at all. So in the 8th plenary meeting of the Workers' Party of Korea, maybe they have decided there is no need to create such a position until the end of the 8th Party Congress. So to a certain degree, they did not want to have some kind of control tower for the international relations. Maybe they didn't feel the need to have that one. Afterwards, Choi Sun-hee became the foreign minister, and Lee Sun-hee became the deputy minister of the foreign affairs, and both of them are quite hawkish people. They are not the lovers of the negotiations or discussions, the dialogues. So until the end of the 8th Party Congress, I believe that they are going to continue with such a stance, very strong stance. Because of time constraint, I cannot elaborate on all of the ideas I have prepared, but briefly speaking, by September 1st, we have this exercises of the joint military between the U.S. and the ROC. Until the end of the days of the exercises, the rhetorics from North Korea will be very harsh. Probably the things will be changed after the end of the joint military exercises, because historically speaking, they said that we're sorry to say that the audacious initiative is not strong enough to convince North Korea to come to our stance. So I personally believe that the proposal by the Yoon administration is not convincing, and it's very weak. So probably by the end of the year, they're going to have new programs, and they have the next round, next section of the program until the end of the next party Congress. They are going to have the same people in power, so the same position will be maintained. So it will be very difficult for us to imagine any dialogue to be made until the end of the next party Congress days. So maybe we have to wait until the end of the next presidential election in the United States. That will be roughly the same time when they have the next party Congress of the North Korea. So maybe we have to really wait and see what will be happening after the end of these two major events: presidential election in the U.S. and the next party Congress. So anything related to the denuclearization should be seen at that time to know what kind of diplomatic cards that can be made. And the cards will be at the hands of the North Korea at that time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Kim Dong-yeop talked about the North Korea's external strategies, diplomacy strategies, and the military issues. And following that, the researcher, Professor Kim Dong-yeop mentioned that the current change is nothing new. And the researcher Hirai Hisashi talked about how the regime had set its direction again after the Hanoi summit, and he gave us the historical flow. So, like, for example, like the changes in the relations with South Korea, the U.S., as well as nuclear policies. And then, in the end of his presentation, he mentioned that we have to think about what we can do to achieve the negotiation for denuclearization. This is something that we have to focus on. And also, the North Korea's strategic stance will not change easily, and nuclear tests, because of some internal situation as well as the relations with China, it will be difficult for North Korea to conduct nuclear tests. As you know, the party convention takes place every 5 years, and until the 9th party convention, he said that the North Korea is very likely to maintain the current posture and current stance. And therefore, rather than pursuing denuclearization by and of itself, we have to think about what we can do to achieve the negotiation, at least for denuclearization. Now, the third presenter will deal with economic issues. The Professor Im Eun-chul of the Institute for Far Eastern Studies of the Kyungnam University will give us the presentation. So North Korea, the changes will not be easy for North Korea. So in relation with its strategy with South Korea, how can we promote exchanges and cooperation between the two Koreas, and if there will be any chance for us to improve the intercurrent exchanges? So regarding this, the Professor Im Eun-chul will give us a presentation. As introduced, I am Im Eun-chul. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. What I'm going to explain to you today, or the keyword of my presentation, is the intercurrent relations and exchanges and cooperation between the two Koreas. So I'd like to make some diagnosis on intercurrent relations and the potential for future cooperation exchanges. Currently, the intercurrent relation could be defined in North Korea's terms as adversarial relations. or enemy relation. So I'd like to talk about how North Korea had set out this relation with South Korea. Through what process did they define South Korea as a main adversary, and why? And then I'm going to talk about how South Korea should respond to that. And also, basically, we have to understand the security dilemma that North Korean regime faces in order to understand its economic strategies. And also, North Korea has come up with some preconditions to improve for the improvement of its relation with South Korea. So I would like to briefly mention about that. Then I'm going to conclude my presentation by talking about the possibility of inter-Korean cooperation and what would be the most appropriate way to promote that. So if you look at the process of how North Korea defines South Korea as its adversary or enemy, I think this is somehow related with the presentations by the two previous speakers. What triggered this adversary relation is that some South Korean activists and North Korean defectors, they sent the anti-North Korea leaflets and propaganda materials to North Korea. Even before that, yes, we had the debacle of the Hanoi summit and growing distrust between South and North Korea. But one of the major triggers for this adversary relation was the spread of the anti-North Korean leaflets. So as explained by researcher Hirai Hisashi, there have been some massive organizational reshuffle in North Korea, and the unification divisions have come to the front. And the divisions that were charged with the South Korean Exchange Project and National Peace Unification Committee saw their roles reduced. And also the Kim Il-jung, deputy director of the party, mentioned about the shutdown of the liaison office, cancellation of the Kyungnam tourism plan, and complete dismantling of the Kaesong industrial complex during her talk on June 4th of 2020. And right after that, the liaison office was detonated. And then in December 2020, North Korea adopted the law to condemn anti-communism culture in December in 2020. And this is to define and specify its relation with South Korea as adversary-enemy relation. So I think that the adoption of this law is a very important trigger point. And then in January of 2021, they held the 8th convention of the Workers' Party, and they came up with several principles for the improvement of North Korea and South Korea relations. And one of them was to address fundamental issues first, and second is to stopping of any kind of animosities against each other. And also they claim that the Two Koreas Declaration should be implemented faithfully. At the time, the Moon Jae-in offered the humanitarian support as well as the resumption of the individual tourism. But North Korea claimed that these are non-essential issues. And they said that currently South Korea just brought up the non-essential issues such as infection control and humanitarian cooperation and tried to give impression that they are serious about improving inter-Korea relations. But North Korea claims that, however, South Korea continues to turn a deaf ear to our repeated warnings that the deployment of the latest military equipment and joint military exercise with the U.S. must be put into an immediate stop. And they said that the South Korea continuously violate inter-Korean agreement with the development of the latest weapons and defense technologies. And North Korea develops its weapons only for self-defense. So they criticize the South Korea's approaches and put pressure on them. And they said that this abnormal anti-unification practices must be abolished. And they claim that before South Korea condemns North Korea, South Korea should correct its actions and see whether the interconnected relation will be improved or not. So this is how they define South Korea as their major enemy. And if you look at the details of the law that condemns the anti-communism culture, you can see that with the existence of this law, it is virtually impossible for the two Koreas to have cultural engagement and exchanges. As long as this law is up and running, I believe that there will be no exchanges that could take place between the two Koreas. So I would like to cite several clauses of this law, Article 27, 32, and 33. And if you read this slide, you can see that it says that anyone who watches, listens, stores South Korea's movies, recordings, books, songs, and pictures and photos, or introduce and spread any paintings and songs and photos and drawings that reflect South Korea's culture will be subject to hard labor and imprisonment from 5 to 15 years. And also, anyone who introduces and spreads South Korea's movies and songs and recordings and books will be sentenced to lifetime imprisonment or capital punishment. And those who organize and stimulate collective watching of the things will be subject to capital punishment. So this is very stringent, very stern measure. Because of time constraint, I'm not going to explain about the other clauses, but if you look at the current picture of the interrelations, things are so bleak that it's hard for us to imagine the positive. Then, why North Korea does have such a strong animosity against South Korea, and why did they define South Korea as a main adversary? Yes, there could be various reasons behind that. During the 8th convention of the Workers' Party, North Korea came up with the 5-year plan for economic development, and they have come up with the several tasks to achieve this plan. And the gist of it is to achieve self-reliant economy. In other words, yes, North Korea is in hardship, but we should not rely on external support. So North Korea is facing a lot of difficulties, including the COVID-19 and the UN sanctions. But North Korea claims that we have to resolve all these issues on our own. And it also says that we have to give up on any kind of fantasy about the support from the overseas to achieve academic development. And therefore, so this kind of discourse is to strengthen internal solidarity, and also both philosophically and psychologically. North Korea says that we have to make all our efforts to achieve the goals that are presented during the 8th convention. So in order to avoid social unrest and subdue internal disruptions, they somehow exaggerate the threat from the external forces. And also they said that in the midst of the COVID-19 and the UN sanctions, we have to achieve the self-reliant economy. And in order to justify what they claim, I think that they somehow define South Korea as their main enemy. And on August 30th this year, North Korea has held the convention called Emergency Infection Control. And the Kim Il-jung said that we are fighting against the COVID-19, but this fighting is not just to fight against the viruses. Rather, this is to fight against enemies. And here, enemy refers to South Korea. And she claimed that the current COVID crisis is healthcare crisis caused by the anti-communism movement. And they claimed that the Omicron variant was introduced because of the anti-North Korean leaflet. And North Korea's claim and policies are surprisingly consistent. And it has multiple purposes. And here you can see the North Korea's perspective toward the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Put it simply, they said that the Yoon Suk-yeol administration tries to drive a wedge between the two countries more atrociously than any previous conservative regimes and frantically carry out pro-U.S. betrayal activities. This is the basic view on Yoon Suk-yeol administration in North Korea. Because the Yoon Suk-yeol administration, they believe that it's carrying out a very hostile policies against North Korea that can put significant burdens on them. And in this era of Industry 4.0 with technological development, US as well as South Korea we develop latest technologies. And from North Korea's perspective, this is not something that they can catch up with. Although North Korea developed hypersonic, glide jet, and so on, however, they can never catch up with the latest state-of-the-art defense system that the US and South Korea built based on advanced technology. And therefore, North Korea cannot but be scared about the weapon development by US and South Korea. So to have the security guarantee, they have to continuously develop nuclear weapons and military weapons, and at the same time they have to revive the economy. However, they are cash-strapped and also the resource deficient. But in this situation, despite these barriers and difficulties, they have to achieve these dual purposes of the military and economic development. So this is truly an uphill battle that they face. And also for them, between economy and security, security is more important. And oftentimes they're forced to make sacrifices of economy for the sake of security. And if you look at neighboring countries surrounding the Korean Peninsula, more than any time before, they are bent over arms race and arms build up. And I believe that this situation by and of itself could pose a threat to North Korea. I'm sorry for interruption, but please keep your time limit. So here you can see some North Korea's conditions to improve inter-Korean relations. And please refer to the slide. But I think that the most important thing that North Korea calls for is to abolish so-called double standard. And Yoon Suk-yeol administration also talked about the resumption of the inter-Korean exchanges and so-called BOLD plan. And they said that, and it says that the no political consideration will be made in pursuing inter-Korean exchanges. So, as the conclusion, I would like to give you some prospect on the possibility of inter-Korean cooperation. As you may have guessed, the current inter-Korean relation is facing numerous variables at home and abroad, and so North Korea does have very limited leeway, and South Korea also has a very limited room for a maneuver. So it's very difficult to resume the exchanges between the two Koreas. But some experts are talking about so-called the surprising element because we have been under COVID-19 for about 3 years. So some are now saying if the famine and the starvation crisis occur in North Korea, then they will call for humanitarian aid from South Korea. They will accept that. And this could be a surprising breakthrough for the current stalemate. But I don't really agree with this prediction. But even in this adverse conditions, we have to continue to seek inter-Korean cooperation. And for this, we have to pay attention to UN SDG and VNR. During the 8th Party Convention, as I said, North Korea came up with the 5-year economic plan. And there are a lot of overlapping duplications between VNR and 5-year economic development plan, which means that North Korea is highly interested in VNR. And this is something, and also this economic plan was established with a lot of consideration on international norms. So this shows the sort of the silver lining and the potential for cooperation. So now let's take a look at what kind of external cooperation North Korea wants in VNR. And I think that these are closely related with the topics of the economy and security. So for infection and also education and healthcare, I think these are the immediate sectors that we can embark on cooperation. Although we are in a serious difficulty, I believe that we have to help North Korea achieving UN SDG. And with this approach, we may be able to open North Korea and make some gradual improvement in relations with North Korea. And with that, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, and sorry not to be able to give you more time. So please understand that we have limited time. And the SDGs that have been submitted by the North Korea to the UN, including the VNR proposals, they should draw our attention. And there, maybe we can find some interfaces for the contact with them. So thank you very much for your input. Now we have learned the 3 presentations, and we have been hearing about the evaluations of the militarism in the North Korea and the situations, especially internal matters after the failure of the Hanoi summit. So what kind of foreign relations they have as policy. Last but not least, we also heard about the economic exchange possibilities under the sanctions onto the North Korea. So we are able to find some connections and nexus as well as some common ideas and streams here. So I believe that we are all going toward the same direction. As Mr. Hirashi said, maybe we have to wait until the end of the 9th Party Congress. So the question is whether they're going to continue their stance until that time, or will there be any change in the meantime? So is there any possibility for us to see that they are changing from that direction within the next 5 years? And also we see a lot of unexpected international developments like Ukrainian war caused by Russia. So having said that, we all have to think what we can do in order to have a new round of negotiations, what kind of new tools and methods can be utilized by them. So we have to know especially where we are in the whole stream. But the general consensus is that we don't see anything that can be changed, at least until the end of the 9th Party Congress. And also Mr. Imul Chu said that the stance that has been observed so far is actually the reverting to the previous situation before 2018 when they had the failure of the Hanoi summit. So they're only going back to the normal. So they want to have the adversarial relationship and they want to have the power-to-power relationship. And also they are under the very adverse situations in the international community. Therefore, it will be very unlikely for us to see any breakthroughs. And also, Mr. Kim continued to say that everything is not easy, but probably we can find some clues from the VNRs and the other documentation submitted to the United Nations by the North Korea to find some interfaces of the contact with them. So these are the essence and summaries that we have learned so far. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Peter Ward to spend 5 minutes to have the discussion for 5 minutes to Mr. Kim's presentation.
I will be very brief and concise. I really enjoy all the 3 presentations, and I would like to comment on Professor Kim's presentation and ask some questions. First, you used the expression of the demilitary policies, and so this is about the strengthening of the conventional weapons, not just the nuclear weapons. And in terms of the project with South Korea, what do you think will be the ultimate goal of North Korea? In other words, as mentioned by Professor Im, in this era of the Industry 4.0, you see the South Korea and the US develop a lot of offensive weapons and also the state-of-the-art weapons. So do they develop the weapons as part of the defense, or do they have some different intentions in developing such weapons? And second, replacing the weapons with the human labor, you said that they also have a lot of manpower program. And do you think that will they gain more for this program, or is will its ultimate goal is to modernize weapons and also to develop the nuclear weapons? Because in other words, these forces, military forces, yes, it is true that they serve the general public, but will it be really its goal, or the weapon modernization will be its ultimate goal for this project or program? And also you talked about the North Korea siding with Russia, and many experts agree with this. Especially since 2008, such strategic change has become very visible. You said that the change started in year 2008, and so the cost that North Korea has to bear, as well as all the disadvantages North Korea may have to bear with these changes. So that will be my question. Peter is such an eloquent Korean speaker. So Professor Kim, please prepare for the response to the Peter Ward's question. And now Professor Cho will comment on the Hirai Hasashi's presentation.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Cho Jin-gu. I'm the assistant professor at the Institute of Far Eastern Studies. I'd like to discuss the presentations by Mr. Hirai Hisashi. So when we had the failure of the Hanoi Summit in January 2019, ever since that, I really agree with what you have analyzed on the impact of such a failure. So there's nothing I should disagree with what you said so far. However, recently there are some changes in the international community. We see a lot of the tumults here. So my question is, what kind of changes have been made to them, to the North Korea, in terms of their perspectives, North Korea's perspectives to the world? So I'd like to just comment some of the things I have been dealt with. So we know that there is an ever more severe conflict between China and the U.S. in terms of their rivalry. Also, because of the Russian war in Ukraine, the uncertainty level has been abruptly increased in the international community. As Professor Hirai Hisashi said, there is also change in the stance to the nuclearization means as well. And also the weapons they are trying to use is rather than just strategic to the tactical ones. So they want to use the tactical nuclear weapons. So we have to take notice of all these changes so far. What is also important at the same time is that in January last year, when Biden administration took power, and we also see the changes. Also this year, we also have a change of power in Korea with Yoon administration. So what do they mean? What do these changes of power in the U.S. and Korea mean to us? We have to emphasize the importance of the three-party relationship, like the Japan, Korea, and the U.S. So that should be emphasized at the same time. And also, the new administration is talking about the importance of this tripartite relationship. When we look at the past history, under which condition we have seen a good relationship among the three, we have to know there should be, for example, a provocation by the North. That is one condition. And also, we had to have the alliance of the South Korea and the U.S. at the highest level to agree that we're going to do something with the North. And when there is no additional provocations, then we were able to just use our gesture. And also, when there is no provocation, then we were able to work with Japan in the past. Also, from the Korean government side, it is only structural issue with the North, and rather than just past history issues, and it should have the higher importance of the strategies between the two Koreas, South Korea and Japan. So we had to be able to put aside past histories between Korea and the South Korea in order to work together against North Korea. So now I can tell you that Yoon administration is a bit different from that regard. So that's one thing I would like to comment here. For the future scenarios, if I may add my own ideas, as Mr. Hirashi said, there is no likelihood to have a change until the end of the 9th Party Congress. I agree with you, basically. But the question is, do we really have to such a long time? Because it's really a long time. So probably by the end of this year, we're going to have a lot of changes in the international community with some changes there. So is it the best strategy for us just to wait? Is waiting a strategy until that time? Isn't there anything that we can do? So we have to ask ourselves, probably it doesn't have to be the repetition of what we had done before. Maybe we have to think out of the box, to try to do something, anything new. We talked about the statements by Kim Yo-jong, and you also talked about it. And then he also said that once in power, after 2 or 3 years, you have to work very hard to the bones, and then only after that you know what's going on in the world. That's what she said. So the 2 or 3 years she mentioned. So maybe that's the period that she's referring to, the time taken for the change of a power, like with election and everything. So maybe that's a time taken for making policies. So maybe she might have thought about those changeovers when she said 2 or 3 years. But we also have to ask ourselves what measures we can take while waiting for that. So the one thing troubling for me is that I know that there is adaptation to the policies, but Yoon administration doesn't seem to be accommodating to the request by the North Korea, and also the expenditures are trying to be increased nowadays for the defense. All these things kind of can sum up to a situation where we have not been prepared for. Maybe we can not afford to have them. And also nuclear power plant was also mentioned. And so how can we deal with the aftermath of the nuclear power plant? So that's also another thing that we have to tackle. So several questions are rising from there. So I have a couple of questions. First, Japan wants to increase their budget for the defense, and Prime Minister Kishida, after the demise of the Abe, who was not fulfilling his wish to have the constitutional change. Do you think that the Prime Minister Kishida is able to perform what is left by the Abe? So can he pick up what he wanted to, what Abe wanted to do, like the change in the constitution? The second question, audacious initiative. That initiative is not audacious enough, I know, but it is meaningful because it means that we are doing something anyway. Probably by the end of the 9th Party Congress, at least. Isn't there anything that we can do or we shouldn't do? For example, not to overly provoke North Korea. So is there any advice that you can give about the do's and don'ts? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the detailed analysis. But there are a lot of negative situations, so we have to find some breakthrough. And he mentioned that we have to find out the things that we can do to address the current issues. Now, regarding the Professor Im's presentation, Professor Kwon Young-kyung will comment on that. Yes, so good afternoon. I am from National Institute for Unification Education, and I'm honored to serve as a panelist in this discussion session. We run out of time, so I'll be very brief. Regarding the three presenters' presentations, I was able to see things in perspective, which is, the North Korean researchers, they have studied the North Korea from the Kim Il-sung era to Kim Jong-un era, and oftentimes they do have a sort of the historical perspectives, and from their perspectives, I think that the Kim Jong-un administration is actually at a very critical juncture in its relations with South Korea. So the first shift is the so-called two-Korea strategy. Back in 2013, when Kim Jong-un took the helm, I was shocked by his approach, or the so-called two-Korea track. And Kim Jong-un regime specified this approach, and I think that somehow with a lot of cautions internally, because they do have their own justification for its regime survivor. And also they have a monolithic leadership system, and therefore, although they claim that there is no political conflicts between the different divisions, but still I think that there could be some debate. And in that sense, the 우리 민족끼리, with removing that, I think that the North Korea may have gone through a very heated debate to have this two-Korea approach. And I think that some relevant signs have been observed as well. But yes, so there were some disputes internally in North Korea, but compared to Kim Jong-il era, in Kim Jong-un era, there were a lot of drastic changes. For example, like sometimes they go for hardline, and then the appeasement policies, and then go for super hardline stances. So there were about at least 6 major shifts in its diplomatic policies, and I think these shifts were made because of some internal changes within North Korea. And also the Kim Jong-un got killed during the traffic accident. And I think all of these actually indicate some disputes and the conflicts that happened in North Korea. And I think that already the window opportunity for the 우리 민족끼리 was closed. And one of the big trends that forced North Korea to change its course is the changes in its nuclear strategies. So during the Kim Jong-il era, they had the ambiguous strategy, but now their strategy is more to have the nuclear stockpiles, and they now even claim that they are going to develop the strategic nuclear weapons, not just the tactical weapons. And the third shift is from the changes in the strategy for regime survivor. In other words, compared to Kim Jong-un administration, I think the Kim Jong-un administration has come up with a lot of changes, like the changes from the parallel development of economy and military to military first policies. And until 2018, or sometime after that, during the 2020 New Year address, Kim Jong-un mentioned that they are going to resume the inter-Korean exchanges and the opening of the Kaesong Industrial Complex without preconditions. And I think that that was the last time when North Korea still pursued the exchanges and cooperation to revive its economy. But then later, North Korea changed its stance again, and they are now focusing more on self-reliant economy. So they established the Economic Development Division. So still it shows that they are willing to induce capital from overseas. But for them, the South Korea is just one of the capital sources. So what they are trying to do is to attract foreign capital sources from all kinds of countries, which means that North Korea will no longer offer any kind of special advantages and privilege to South Korea for inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation projects. And therefore, what's very bleak for the future is that, and also there was a big change in and massive disruption in year 2019, including the COVID-19 and Ukraine war, and especially after the Ukraine war. There was even a heightened conflict between the value-based system and the military first groups. And sort of the blocks have been established. So during the Cold War, yes, there were the bifurcation of the democracy and the socialism or communism. We don't really have this kind of bifurcation today. However, you have to belong to any kind of club in order to ensure your survivor, which means that in North Korea, when pursuing their own survivor, you see that the UN sanction is a sort of the constant that can never be addressed in the short-term manner, and therefore North Korea has to belong to any kind of club for survivor. And in this situation, any opportunities has emerged for North Korea. So this is something that I am closely interested in, which is the offer from Russia for the Donetsk and Luhansk economic development. North Korea, rather, the Russia says that it's going to hire North Korean labor, a massive a number of them. And if that becomes feasible, then I think that this is like a South Korea pursuing economic growth through the big infrastructure projects in Middle East in the 1970s. So I think that a similar opportunity could be given to North Korea. And also, when North Korea belongs to this kind of club, what they can gain is that you see that North Korea is equipped with a lot of resources that can be developed for Industry 4.0. So in that sense, you see, we have a lot of negative elements that compromise the prospect of the inter-Korean exchanges and cooperation for the future. So taking all of them into consideration, yes, the South Korean government has come up with a bold plan, and I think this is a right movement, but I think devils are in details. So will the details really reflect all these changes in these situations on the Korean Peninsula? In the sense, my question to Professor Im Il-chul is as such that, let's say, that given the current situation, to be very frank with you, if we carry out bold plans, what kind of efforts we have to make in order to break the current stalemate and deadlock? That's my question. And also one thing that I am very worrisome is that somehow we ourselves close down all kinds of spaces for inter-Korean exchanges in the name of penalty. So I doubt whether the window opportunity that was created in the late 1990s, will they come back again? So I think at least within the next 10 years down the road, I think that things will be very bleak, and the possibility for inter-Korean exchanges, I think, is very limited. So the Professor Kwon gave us a new perspective and gave us an overview of inter-Korean exchanges and situations on the Korean Peninsula. So whether it's the inter-Korean relations or situations surrounding the Korean Peninsula, I think that all of us do have a pretty negative perspectives and prospects. Now, then the thing that we have to discuss is how can we find a breakthrough? How can we break away from this long-standing stalemate? So regarding that, when answering the questions, please keep that in focus, and what we can do strategically and tactically to address the negative trend on the Korean Peninsula and turn this crisis into opportunities. So starting with the Professor Kim Dong-ya, followed by researcher Hirai Hisashi and Professor Im Il-chul. Thank you very much for a great question. So I said that the demilitarism is related with the strengthening of the conventional weapons. And it's not the aim or goal, rather the demilitarism. As we passed through the 1950s and 1960s, North Korea pursued the parallel development of economy and military. And during the time, they put a lot of resources on military development first. So it has led to the imbalances in terms of distribution of resources, and economy got aggravated. But then, with the changes of the era to the people first policies, North Korea said that it's not going to increase the budget for defense system. So this shows that the demilitarism is not just about strengthening the conventional weapons. Rather, it is more about normalizing the so-called distribution of resources so that they can pursue economic development for the lives of the citizens. But then there could be two problems issuing from that, which is who can take care of North Korea's security. So they said that the citizens can go out for economic activities, but then who will take care of the security of North Korea? This is something that North Korea faces. It's a sort of the dilemma. And the second, so military in North Korea has had a vested, established interest for a long time, but with this economic development focused policies, there could be the lowering of the morals among military forces, and even the betrayal of the military forces. So how can they minimize these issues, still pursuing economic development? So in order to find out solution for these challenges, what's important is that they have to strengthen the nuclear weapons and conventional weapons to relieve the general public as well as to empower military. And as for the human resources program, the second question, so I think it's about which one is first between the weapon and the human resources. And in order to pursue economic development, yes, given its limited economic capabilities, they have to divert the monies that were used to be invested in military to economy. But these are not enough because North Korea has a very low level economic development. So in order to normalize the North Korea's economy, the first resources they have is human resources. And most of the young laborers, they are serving in military in North Korea. And therefore, these military forces, they are not just there to support the general public, rather they are mobilized and utilized for economic development as resources. And also to make up for the shortcomings, they are trying to strengthen the conventional and nuclear weapons. Because if North Korea has only nuclear weapons and without deterrences in terms of the conventional weapons, and as you know, the North Korean nuclear weapon system is not that sophisticated, it's still very rudimentary, and it has no substantial deterrence, and therefore they cannot give up on conventional weapons. That's why they have to pursue both nuclear and conventional weapon development. And so in this process, they are trying to have the low-hanging fruit first. That's why they are bent over backwards to develop missiles at low cost. And by doing so, they think that they can have sort of the win-win effect between missiles and nuclear weapons. And your last question? So any kind of disadvantages when North Korea sides with the Russia? As you know, there has been some heightened tension between the US and China, and the deeper the tension goes, the lesser likelihood that the US and China will have so-called big deal. And this is very advantageous to North Korea. As mentioned by Professor Kwon, Russia officially mentioned that the North Korea sanctions has to be lifted. So I don't think that the current situation gives any kind of disadvantage to North Korea. The only disadvantage that they could have is time. Because the UN sanction is the fight against time, it will be a prolonged process. So time is not on their side, actually.
Well, we have only 5 minutes, so I really hope that you can have a very, very short reply because we have to make way for the next session. Yes. Thank you very much. Mr. Cho mentioned many things. Among them, there is a difficulty of the South Korea-Japan relationship. So while the North Korea is moving ahead, the historical issue is a hindrance to the relationship. So it's not making any move, any headway at all. Having said that, I believe that the discussions should be made, and there is a need for cooperation between the two countries with historical issues with our enemy friends at all, actually. So we have to just let aside all these issues when we have the friendly relationship. So it can be difficult, but it should be needed. So COVID-19 has been another hindrance to have such a relationship fairing, but that's not something we also can do something. And what does this government, its administration have to do or not have to do, or should not do? For example, preemptive strike should not be done, and also the unnecessary provocation should not be made, and that's something we have to be very cautious about. But there are things we can do as well. For example, from last year, the North Korea has been very active in terms of the transforming their agriculture products from the wheat to the barley and other crops. So they want to have the changeover in their crop constituencies. Maybe we can help them to have the transformation in the agriculture business. We can find some areas to cooperate there.
Professor Yim. Thank you, Professor Kwon, for your excellent comment. I also learned a lot from your comment. Thank you very much for giving me such an insight. So the question brought by Professor Kwon, we actually have the next session that will start at 4:10, and I'm scheduled to deliver a presentation on the very question that you raised to me. So please stay tuned to the next session because I'm going to make a presentation on that topic. Thank you very much. So far we have talked about North Korea's military and external strategies, as well as its relations with South Korea and the possibility of intercurrent exchanges and cooperation, as well as the internal situations within North Korea. So we have made a lot of analysis, evaluation. If time allows, then I actually want to talk more about what kind of strategies or strategic choices we have to make to turn this crisis into opportunity. I think this is a very important topic that we have to address, but because of time constraint, we may not be able to do so. So far we have had a very good overview and discussion. So even in this situation of great difficulty, we have identified what kind of tasks we have to conduct and what approaches we can take to induce changes in North Korea. So I think that this is something that we have to explore further in the future, even after this session. So in this regard, the Kyungnam University, the Institute of Far Eastern Studies, We will continue to research on the Ukraine war, the US election, and also whether the Ukraine war will be further protracted or will there be the armistice in the wars. I think that a lot of changes will take place in the autumn. And in the situation, North Korea, and again, it's going to conduct the 7th nuclear test and so on. So we are going to research all of these matters in a very comprehensive manner so that our research institute can organize the seminar once again to further explore this issue and find out the way forward. I would like to thank all those who are on the floor and joining us online. Thank you very much for your attendance. I'm very sorry that I could not give you the chance to ask your questions. I'm very sorry. And as I said earlier, our research institute will organize another forum to delve into this issue. And with this, we would like to conclude this session. So the North Korea's external strategies and the prospects for future during the Kim Jong-un era. The session will be closed here, and I would like to thank Professor Kim Dong-yeop, Hirai Hisashi, and Im Chul for great presentations, as well as our discussants, including the Peter Ward, Jo Jin-gu, and Kwon Yang-kyung. Thank you very much. And with that, we would like to conclude the session. Thank you.